So, if you couldn't tell from the title and my outfit, we're looking at the miraculous tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir. So I've got my ladybird print dress, I've got my Cat Noir ring. Yeah, it's a cat, it's not in focus, never mind. I've got my dragon necklace because it didn't have a fox or anything. And I've got my snake. There's a snake on my leg there. Where's the camera? There it is. Maybe doing with my leg. No, that's my knee, it's fine. Let's start. Why am I talking about a kids show, and also, what is it? So The Miraculous Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir, or just Miraculous for short, is a CGI cartoon show created by Thomas Struck and Jeremy Zag of Zagtoons. The show started in 2015 on Nickelodeon, but rights were soon acquired by Netflix and later Disney, who I believe currently own the exclusive streaming rights to the show. It's just starting its 4th season out of a currently planned 5, although I did hear rumours that there were going to be 10, but I think that might just be born out of the confusing episode release times, which means that one 26 episode season may be mistaken for and labelled as 2 short 13 episode seasons. So that's just confusing. The show is a mix between a romantic slice of life comedy and a superhero action. The romantic part is simple. Marinette Dupan-Cheng is in love with her classmate Adrien Agreste, who also happens to be a model and the son of her fashion idol Gabriel Agreste. The rom-com parts of the show nearly focus entirely on her attempts to confess her love to Adrien. The superhero part is a lot more complicated. It's based around magical jewellery called Miraculous, each of which are linked to a kwame, usually called gods by fans, but in the comics they seem to be incarnations of intangible concepts such as creation and destruction. Marinette has the Miraculous of the Ladybird, or Ladybug, which is a pair of earrings which allow her to turn into the superhero Ladybug. Meanwhile, Adrien Agreste has the Miraculous of the Black Cat, a ring which allows him to transform into Cat Noir. Their enemy is Hawkmoth, who has the Miraculous of the Butterfly, which is why he's called Papillon in the French, which he uses to create villains out of people who are feeling strong negative emotion. The word Akuma is thrown around quite a lot, and it sort of means 2 different things in the show. Akumas are both the little black and purple butterflies that Hawkmoth imbues with power, and also the villains created when a butterfly possesses someone. Akuma, interestingly enough, comes from Japanese folklore and is often translated to English as demon or even Satan sometimes. Which is interesting, but also a tad confusing, as the miraculous magic system seems to have its origins in Chinese folklore. So, you know, there we go. The show is essentially a Monster of the Week affair, wherein Ladybug and Cat Noir use their powers of creation and destruction to free the Akuma from the influence of Hawkmoth's Akuma and fix any damage. Finally, the last thing worth mentioning is the infamous love square. We know that Marinette is in love with Adrien, but Cat Noir is in love with Ladybug, but here's the kicker. Ladybug doesn't know that Cat Noir is Adrien, and Adrien doesn't know that Ladybug is Marinette, so they're in love with each other and don't realise it. Now, a lot of fans like to pretend like it's really, really complicated for people outside the fandom, but it's really not that complicated. It's basically like Lois Lane is in love with Superman and rejects Clark Kent because of it. It's quite simple, really. So why am I talking about it? After all, it's a show meant for young kids. And I'm talking about it firstly because it's crazy popular. Secondly, it's a show I actually quite like. Thirdly, although it's meant for kids, the viewership is far larger, with several teenagers, young adults and parents watching it too. The characters are, after all, teenagers going through teenage problems like love and magical terrorists, which therefore gives it appeal to older kids and teenagers. Fourthly, because it's a kids show, one has to be extra careful that problematic or toxic messages are not accidentally being broadcast for malleable minds. Fifthly, it's a fascinating example of how not to take criticism. The discussion will contain spoilers, so if you're interested in watching the show and don't want it spoiled, stop now. Some are worse than others though, and I think the only really massive spoiler is going to be in the second video, so you'll be alright. I mean, it's quite predictable, so you'll probably be fine. Part 1. Continuity, or the reason episodes don't need to be in order. I don't think it's any secret that Miraculous has a problem with episode release dates. Whether this comes from a place of episodes not being finished or created in order, not all being completed before being passed to distributors, or different distributors wanting to one-up each other is up for debate. But the point is, episodes rarely come out in order, and sometimes there is discrepancy over what order they're actually meant to be in at all. Fans had hoped that as season 4 had to be delayed because of the plague, they might take the time to make sure it's all in sequence, especially as Strzok promised every episode would drop a bomb, which implies the necessity for order. But no, the first episode released was episode 6, and featured changes that were never explained or acknowledged by the characters. And even then, the changes were quite surface level. There was a costume change halfway through the episode, and the villain had some souped-up powers. So that there wasn't really much to suggest that anything big had happened between the events of season 3 and season 4, which doesn't bode well for the previous 5 bombshells, 2 of which I do know about already. Although, if Strzok's hyping up for seasons 2 and 3 is anything to go by, it's no surprise bombshell is a bit of an exaggeration. And yet, despite the episodes never being released in order, it doesn't affect how easily one watches the show, and the reason for this is the status quo. The show is stuck in this sort of suspended state where nothing changes, nothing is learned, and nothing is affected by anything else. Even if something is realised during the episode or something is developed, it doesn't often stick around for any other episode in the season. The only times we get a sense of change is with the season finales, and they do tend to carry through to the next season, so it's not bad. So let's explore this a bit more. Firstly, with the episode formula, which goes something like this. A subplot is introduced, usually involving Marinette attempting to get closer to Adrian. A problem in the subplot arises. Hawkmoth akumatizes someone having a bad day, often because of the subplot. Ladybug and Cat Noir appear on the scene. Cat Noir flirts badly. Ladybug summons her lucky charm.
What am I supposed to do with this?
She immediately works out what to do with it. The Akuma is defeated.
Pound it!
Subplot is resolved. Hawkmoth monologues about how he'll get them next time. This formula has been going on for 3 seasons, with a few exceptions such as Sandboy, Oblivio and Stormy Weather 2. And we had hoped season 4 might change this, but when the only real changes that had occurred, mostly Marinette and Adrian's relationship statuses, were reversed by the end of the 2nd episode, any hope I'd had was dashed and we returned to the stagnant status quo. But I'll get more into that later. Usually, shows with formulas like this aren't a problem necessarily, but it's a problem here because it clashes with the show's premise. If the show had just been superheroes fight a monster of the week whilst juggling school life, it would work. But because the premise is a specific villain they're trying to take down, and a romance which is focused on nearly every episode, it implies a set endpoint and thus a journey towards it. The formula, however, means the status quo must remain unaffected by all these events, which means a lack of progression towards the end goal, and so everything becomes stagnant. Everything remains the same, and they just end up doing the same thing, rehashing the same problems every episode, which is pretty ironic considering these words from the esteemed creator. The continuity and timescale is also pretty confusing, not helped by the episodic nature, and therefore some of the simplest, most basic bits of information are called into question, such as how long have Cat Noir and Ladybug actually been in Paris? What year of school are they in? And how old is Marinette meant to be? In season 1, we learn she goes to a college in France, which is the equivalent of a secondary school in the UK, or grades 6 to 10 in the USA. In the episode Pharaoh, she drops a 10th grade textbook, although this is seemingly a silly translation error from the French troisième, which is actually 9th grade, or year 10. This would make her 14 to 15 years old. And then in Timebreaker, her classmate turns 15, thus supporting Marinette being 14 to 15 years old. But in season 2, in the episode Befana, she has a birthday and she turns 14. So she must have been 13 in season 1, right? In Gorizilla, Adrian is confirmed as being 14 and had a birthday in season 1, which would imply he was 13 and turned 14, the same age as Marinette. And even if the unlikely was true that Befana and Gorizilla were meant to be set before Pharaoh, making them 14 at the time, the first 3 seasons take place over the same year, so they would still be in year 9, which is what Strzok says, and therefore she shouldn't have a year 10 textbook. There's also no sense of the year progressing across the show, but that's because Strzok is a god and bends the time of year to his will. Let's look at Lila. She arrives in the final, or third to final, episode of Series 1 in Volpina. The 2-parter Origins episode is set at the beginning of the school year, and we know that the first 3 seasons all take place over 1 year. So Volpina, being one of the final episodes of that season, should probably take place at the end of the winter term, just before the Christmas break, as the Christmas special, I think, takes place between seasons 1 and 2. But in Chameleon, the beginning of season 3, we find out that Lila arrived after the summer break in English and just after the start of the school year in French. Therefore, when did she arrive? The beginning of the French year is after the summer break. But we just had several episodes which surely span at least a few weeks between Origins and Volpina, and so either she came at the beginning of the next year, which messes things up, or all of those episodes took place over about 1 or 2 weeks, which is unlikely because A, that is a lot of accumatizations, and B, Ladybug and Cat Noir should not be as well known and well loved as they are shown to be by the whole of Paris. The finale of season 2, Heroes' Day, introduces a Parisian holiday where they celebrate being heroic. And we know this is the first Heroes' Day since Ladybug and Cat Noir turned up. But in Animaestro, episode 2 of season 3, there's a film about Ladybug and Cat Noir that has been in production for 3 years, which you don't need to be a mathematician to work out why that doesn't add up. And let's not even go into the times of year that I mentioned. We've had everything from Valentine's Day, Christmas, and the last day of summer mentioned in the first season alone. According to a Strook, this is fine because The Simpsons did it, whilst ignoring the fact that The Simpsons doesn't have an overarching plot, so it doesn't really matter, whereas Miraculous does. And this show, by the way, is about teenagers. Therefore, coming of age is always going to be a theme whether you want it or not. Therefore, you can't be jumping around like this. There are other things too, like Lila successfully gets a lot of the students to at least like Marinette less, by outrageous lying, by the way, which is stupid. But this only really comes into effect when she's on screen. If she's not in the episode, everyone treats Marinette the same again, even though they had previously banished her to the back of the classroom and glared at her like she was the devil. Then there's stuff like Nuru, the butterfly Kwame, specifically stating in Origins Part 1 that the Miraculous aren't meant to be used for evil. Yet apparently every Miraculous has an evil activation phrase. Like, wouldn't it make more sense for the Miraculous to just be neutral and all of them capable of evil if in evil hands, as opposed to having special words to activate the evil powers? And also, why did Nuru then tell Hawkmoth the evil phrase? And how come when Chloe took the Bee Miraculous for evil purposes, she still said the good phrase, buzz on? I will admit, I am nitpicking somewhat. So why do I bring these up? Usually I wouldn't care that much about something silly and fun, but the problem is, these things are so easy to get right, and it shows a disturbing lack of forethought, planning, editing and checking when creating the series. It feels lazy and not thought out, and it makes me unlikely to trust anything this show or Thomas Strook says, because it will probably clash with something else. And after all, how am I meant to take a guy seriously who claims a character is both 2 years older than his sister, and also her twin brother? Unless the mum was in labour for like 2 years. He seems to either be greatly exaggerating his writing abilities, or, as there can be up to 5 writers per episode, this is a case of too many cooks spoil the broth. Which brings us back onto the status quo. It isn't allowed to change. Marinette is a stuttering mess around Adrian, always uncomfortable, and still can't talk to him after 3 seasons. Cat Noir is in love with Ladybug, flirts with her at every opportunity, but is unable to take a hint when she says no, and occasionally mopes about it. They have made 0 effort to find out who Hawkmoth is, apart from in that one episode, and if they've learned anything about the Miraculous, they never use it, unless that information is required by the plot, which is only sort of a couple of episodes a season. Now the show likes to think it's developed. The episode Stormy Weather 2 basically tells us all the ways the characters have developed, which is not at all. Apparently Ladybug and Cat Noir are really good close friends and great partners now, but they've always been great partners, with the only obvious exception being in Origins when they first meet. Marinette is apparently now great friends with Adrian and can talk to him about anything, but we're never shown this, of course, because watching Marinette stutter and stumble and act like a creep is the pinnacle of comedy, so why change it? Alia and Nino, who are a couple of their friends, talk about how they've changed since becoming superheroes too, but all that's actually changed since the first episode is their relationship status. Then there's this tweet from Thomas Strook. Apparently, the fandom's reaction to Luca and Kagami, who are the love rivals, shows development. I beg to differ. It shows how people's perception of characters changed as they found out more about them. Development is seeing an egg hatch into a chick. This is more like turning on the light to see the unhatched egg more clearly. Then we have the episode Truth, which is episode 1 of season 4. And they changed the status quo. They remembered what happened at the end of season 3 and made the appropriate change. only to completely reverse it at the end. All of that development, gone. All of that build-up, pointless. Thomas Ostruck, smug. Finally, added lore does not equal development. Every now and again, the audience are thrown a bone, if you will. Something new about miraculous magic, whether it's fancy power-up potions, a brief lesson in Egyptian holders, or Fu's tragic backstory. But none of this stuff really means anything. The history bits about how the miraculous have been used in the past or made it to Paris are glossed over and only really brought up once or twice to no effect. Which is a shame because it would have been really interesting. And the power-up potions don't really feel like development of the magic system. You know when a show starts getting tired, so in an attempt to vamp it up, the writers will give their characters extra powers and stuff that look cool but don't actually have any substance? Yeah, it feels like that. The audience aren't told anything. We don't know what all the power-ups are, so whenever a new one is used, it feels a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina, as opposed to a set-up solution. And it calls into question times they didn't use the power-ups, when they probably should have. If they had these space ones all along, why didn't they use them in Star Train when they were in space? Basically, whenever lore is added, it feels shallow and pointless. Like, say the world building is a lake. Instead of making that lake deeper, or pushing it down the plot river, all this stuff is just making it wider but still shallow. And sometimes the added lore and world building is actually detrimental to the show's internal logic. For example, in the New York special, we see that America is full of supers. So full, in fact, they have supers doing mundane things like working as traffic wardens and selling hot dogs. Up until this point, superheroes have only been mentioned in conjunction with things like comics and merchandise, kind of like how superheroes are talked about in the real world. Batman comics, Wonder Woman films, Superman boxer shorts. So I, and I'm sure several other people, assume that the world was like ours, just with magic jewellery. So when they go to New York, and there are all these supers everywhere, we're just forced to completely reevaluate our perception of the world. Suddenly, those comics weren't just comics, they were biographies? And why on earth haven't these supers helped France yet? None of them thought, hey, we're supers, and as there are an excess of supers in New York, maybe some of us should go help the literal children trying to take down a superpowered terrorist on their own. Hello, right, me from the future. I've just watched episode 3 of season 4, Gang of Secrets I think it was called, and I have to eat a very tiny piece of humble pie because they did actually do something quite different at the end. Changed up the status quo in a way I don't think they can ignore for the rest of the episodes. Episode 6, which came out first, didn't need to acknowledge this change because it was about a character who wasn't in it. So yeah, hopefully the rest of the episodes in the season will remember that dramatic thing. I have other thoughts on it. I was a bit annoyed that that person got told but not the other person, but it's fine, it's cool. But still, yeah, they did a thing and it was interesting and different, so well done. You get a continuity point. Well, not a continuity point, a breaking the status quo point. Well done show. Let's move on. Part 2. Lessons. For a show about school students, no one seems to learn anything. The characters in Miraculous never learn anything, or at least it isn't explicitly or implicitly made clear that they learn anything. Because most characters never get called out on their behaviour. Unless, of course, they're the nasty characters, but they don't learn anything because people are incapable of changing for the better, apparently. But when the good characters do questionable things, they don't get called out at all. Instead, their behaviour is either played off for laughs, such as Marinette stealing Adrian's phone, memorising his life schedule, prepping and wrapping all his birthday presents for the next 35 years, attempting to break into his house. Or it's just brushed under the rug, like all those times that she's lied or accused classmates without any proof. There are no consequences. She never apologises, and so she never really learns, even though that is apparently the real formula. And it's the same with the other characters too. Alia clearly doesn't fact check if she believes all of Lily's outrageous story straight away, but she's never been called out for that. And certainly not for being a hypocrite when she asks Marinette for proof without gathering proof herself. Also, it was struck. That's not how journalism works. Lila's power of lying being stronger doesn't stop Alia doing any research at all. Cat Noir is never called out for moping when Ladybug rejects him. Adrian doesn't get called out for allowing Lila to go as far as to get Marinette expelled when he could have nipped it in the bud ages ago. And when characters are called out for breaking rules, we're meant to feel sorry for them. I'm sorry, Rose, but you shouldn't be writing letters and squirting perfume during your chemistry lessons. I'm sorry, Max, either your robot is a sentient being who isn't enrolled in your class and shouldn't be there, or is a piece of technology which shouldn't be out during class. Nathaniel somehow gets away with being asleep in school every other episode. In my school, someone once fell asleep and the teacher dropped a massive pile of textbooks next to his head to wake him up. Although I did once fall asleep during university, during a lecture, but it was literary theory, so I think I'm allowed. And that's the other odd thing about the school. It does seem oddly okay with the fact that students are getting akumatized left, right and centre. I mean, there's a section about Madame Bustier teaching meditation and stuff, which obviously hasn't helped. But you'd think they'd be cracking down on bullying, as that seems to be the case of quite a few. There's a lot of assault directed at Madame Bustier, which, to be fair, I do understand. She does seem inept at her job and never punishes students who are idiots. It is kind of ironic considering Bustier is painted as the good and nice teacher everyone likes, whereas the other teacher, Madame Mendeleev, is the horribly nasty one. When I actually like her better. She's passionate about science, which I can get behind. Science is cool, kids. The school itself seems very simple as well. Like, I get that the show isn't going to go into the lesson plans because that's boring, but they were seriously teaching a bunch of teenagers about Sleeping Beauty. Like, not even the original Italian story with its consent issues, but the Disney-fied Sleeping Beauty. But I guess we needed to hammer in the idea of true love's kiss or whatever, which now I think about it might be why the show is so reluctant to show a proper kiss in any relationship that isn't the love square. It cheated me out of my Lucanet kiss, and I'm not happy about it. The next point isn't so much a criticism, but actually a missed opportunity. We're all aware of kids' programs that try to teach children important lessons, whether through thinly veiled stories in like My Little Pony, or by literally informing the audience not to do drugs or whatever in shows like that Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. And this is a gimmick that's been made fun of many times in other shows.
So there really isn't a lesson here.
Yep, it was all completely meaningless.
But it is a missed opportunity here. Why? Because it's in a unique position to teach more nuanced lessons and open up conversation about things such as mental health, which seem to be increasing more and more with each generation. A programme about how negative emotions can be taken advantage of and turn people into villains is actually a pretty cool concept, and could be used to teach lessons about handling emotions and such. For example, the episode Felix could have been used to explore grief over losing someone. Captain Hardrock could have been an interesting commentary about personal freedom versus respecting others. Silencer could have been about having a voice against injustice and also the idea of doing bad things for good reasons if it's worth it. Yes, the show is for children, but that doesn't mean you can't start teaching them about empathy, introspection, handling emotions and critical thinking early. Of course you don't have to at all. It isn't television's job. But the shows that do more than just entertain, the shows that teach us how to think, feel and process ourselves and the world around us are the shows that stick, the ones we come back to time and time again, the shows that will be remembered years from now. Next time, I'll be looking at 3 spicy, controversial subjects: Chloe, Marin and Adrian as the main characters, and the romance. Fun times.